Hey everyone, and welcome back to another World of Warcraft Legion video. So today we're going to be going over all of the stuff that we learned from a recent Q&A with Game Director Ian Hazakostas. Broadly speaking, this video is in 5 major categories. We're starting off with some future content stuff, then we're going to talk about class mechanics, then some item level and stat questions, finally some legendaries, and then I've just put everything else into a sort of miscellaneous category. So let's just get right into the video and hit it off with future content. So patch 7.3. A lot of people were wondering, what is 7.3? What is Argus? Is Argus an expansion? What's going on? So, Argus is patch 7.3. It's not an expansion. They felt like Argus itself would be a little bit single in its tone as an expansion, and overall they think it's going to work quite well as a patch. It's going to contain a new landmass, all the stuff that you've come to expect with a major content patch, like something like, say, 5.2. And overall, their goal is to sort of cap off the story of the Legion expansion. Will that mean we end the Legion? Who the hell knows, but that's basically what 7.3 is. Next, let's talk about patch 7.1.5's PTR date. So we don't actually know a release date, but they said that it's planned to be on the PTR early next week, so I'll be doing coverage of that on the channel. Now, a part of that's going to include doing some coverage of the new class changes and some of the new content, but yes, PTR early next week, so I think it won't be that long until it actually comes out. Next, let's talk about the Nighthold raid release, and also some of their philosophies regarding raids and patches. So, the Nighthold is currently in the game, it's just locked, and their plan is to unlock it sometime in mid to late January. Of course, it's already been tested on the beta, so I'm assuming that content's pretty much good to go. Overall, though, their goal with the raids is to have about 4 or 5 months between them, so between Emerald Nightmare and Nighthold, that's roughly within their goal, especially since we do have the Trial of Valor sort of coming in there in the middle to sort of smooth out that period of time. So Ian said that with patch 7.2, the Tomb of Sagaras raid likely will not open the same day that 7.2 releases. Part of their wider goal of having a steady stream of content is decoupling some elements of patches. They feel the players at the time 7.2 comes out will be eager for new world and dungeon content, but Nighthold will still be content that they're enjoying and content that's still worthwhile and relevant to the game. So basically, the story of 7.2 is going to be unlocking that raid, and then at some point, maybe a few weeks after the patch comes out, that's when the raid will be unlocked. He mentioned Hellfire Citadel, saying that the raid could have waited a little bit longer, looking in hindsight, but it's certainly the case that Tanan Jungle could not have waited anymore, and that is something that people really did need to have in the game. I guess really the overall goal here is that, yeah, steady stream of content every few months. There's going to be something new popping up in the game. Next, on the topic of 7.2, let's just mention class mounts. This question came up a few times, but basically some specs have different colors where it's needed, especially when it fits the theme. So an Arcane Mage and a Fire Mage will have a different color of mount. A golden colored owl thing doesn't make much sense for the Shadow Priest, so they get a shadowy version, stuff like that. They also mentioned Battlegrounds and 7.2, and said that no new battlegrounds were announced for 7.2 because they're focusing on the PvP brawls and how they can bring new content and new value to the system that already exists. Ian did mention wanting to make new battlegrounds, but that the focus right now is all on Legion stuff, not on Horde versus Alliance, so they just didn't really think they could get away for it to fit. I get what he's saying. I also don't necessarily agree, though. I think the PvP content doesn't necessarily have to make the most narrative sense. We don't have to add PvP when the story is all Horde versus Alliance. I think it's just a good idea to add a new battleground so that people get a new form of gameplay. Specifically, I am interested in them adding new types of battlegrounds that are surrounding the core game modes, like the capture the flags, stuff like that, rather than the big gimmick battlegrounds, because I feel like the gimmick battlegrounds are kind of fun for a few times, but really after that, you don't get that high quality sort of PvP gameplay that I think a lot of people would be looking for in new battleground content. Okay, next let's move on to class mechanics, and we'll be starting off with class reworks. So he said that reworking a class is something for expansions, and that maybe their language hadn't been the most clear with 7.1.5 in the BlizzCon panel, so basically it's not like they're reworking and massively changing any of the specs in the game, but what they are doing in 7.1.5 is fixing up talents, maybe adding some new ones, adding some new utility back in, changing the secondary stats, and then tweaking some elements of rotational feel. So that's really their goal with 7.1.5. I think that's fair enough. Changing a spec on its head completely mid-expansion has generally ended up being something that's not the best. It's better to keep that stuff to an expansion where people expect it. So at any rate, we're going to see what these initial changes are next week, but he did say that more changes will be added to the 7.1.5 PTR, and that what comes next week is kind of just like their, first wave of things, and that there is more planned. Next, let's talk about raids in respect to class mechanics, and this really ties into some of the performance and class balance concerns that people have. Right now, they don't have a good mix of encounter types with Emerald Nightmare, and it's one of his regrets. For an example, there aren't really super prevalent AoE fights in Emerald Nightmare, which really hurts specs, as they have a niche that's quite good, as an example, in AoE. So it should be the case that a spec is, it's okay in some fights, but it's really good in some fights. Whereas currently, it's more like some specs are great in dungeons and some other ones are great in raids, and that's something that they want to fix. Now, we also have some talk about Brewmasters. So its community perception with Brewmasters is basically his overall point, and that they are actually really good. And Ian said that he doesn't think his response is going to feel good for the people who are experiencing problems. He said the Brewmasters are really, really strong, but they just have a different feel, and that the metrics relating to damage taken don't really reflect their actual strengths, because by smoothing out damage at the cost of maybe taking a little bit more damage overall, it does cause this situation where they overall do die less. Now, it would seem like that's a position coming from them seeing stats behind the field, so it could be that, yes, it is true, and these concerns over Brewmaster aren't a massive problem when you look at the numbers, and it is more of a community perception thing. He also said that they are, as an example, one of the only tanks that can deal with, like, the Phase 3 spear thingy on Odin in sort of a way that's a lot easier than the other classes who have to go mad on their cooldowns. He did, however, say that they understand there's a high skill cap, and sometimes it feels like taking a Brewmaster is a bit of a risk. So yeah, nothing really definite there. I think it's true for people who are worried about the Brewmaster Monk. That's maybe not going to be the most, the best thing to hear. But I do think there's a good chance he could be right. And often it is, I guess, kind of true that community perception doesn't necessarily represent the facts, because, everything turns into memeage, and it is also the case that some of the stuff with Brewmasters, they just do operate mechanically differently to all of the other tanks. So that is something that's pretty big, and for non-tank players, they just mightn't understand that. Next, Elemental. He said that they are going to be doing some work and looking at Elemental, and that they hear the concerns. Currently, there's a lot of high points in the spec. You've got your Maelstrom, your fully Maelstromed up Earthshock, you've got your Lava Blasts, and then your Artifact Weapon ability. So that's kind of like 3 high points in the rotation, points that are supposed to feel really good. So not all of those points can feel really powerful, because then it would be overpowered. And because you do have these 3 high points, all the other stuff has to be a little bit low as far as its throughput goes. So overall, this seems to be, a little bit of an issue that they want to fix, though he didn't really give any specifics. Next, let's move on to the topic of item levels and stats. I guess given yesterday's video, this is a decently pertinent topic. So these have been a major worry for the dev team, and they want to fix them in a few different ways. First, they want to change the relative power of primary and secondary stats, with primary stats maybe being a little bit better and secondaries being a little bit less powerful. Overall, it's not going to affect your throughput, it's just going to mean that item level is a slightly better representation of a gear's bit of power. So that's one tweak they want to do. They also want to go through the specs to fix the major outliers where some secondaries are like twice as powerful as others, or where some secondaries are more powerful than primaries. Instead of adding primary stats back to jewelry items, they instead want to increase the rate at which item level adds secondary stats to these items, such that item level is a better metric for the power of those jewelry items. Overall, he said that their goal is for a 15 item level increase to always be an upgrade, with a 5 or 10 item level upgrade being a little bit more hit and miss. On the topic of reforging, he said they don't like it because all the work's pretty much just an add-on, and they'd rather fix the actual problem rather than applying this system which smooths out the problem. Next, we've got some stuff about Trial of Valor when it sort of pertains to item level and stats. So Trial of Valor is seeing another 5 item level bump. Currently, it's 5 item levels above Emerald Nightmare, with Helya being 10 item levels higher. They don't think that feels good enough, so now items will be 10 item levels higher than Emerald Nightmare by default, and Helya will be 15 item levels higher. This was done because the roar didn't feel that good, and a 5 item level base improvement, previously it was nice, but in many cases, you'd already have Titan Forge gear, so an increase of 5 in the base item level just didn't feel that rewarding. Now, of course, that's just what he's saying. I haven't actually been into Trial of Valor. I've basically done hardly any 7.1 content, because when it came out, I was in France, and then I got back, and it was BlizzCon. I've just been busy as hell. Next, we've got the topic of gearing when it comes to just some of the dungeons, the catch-up in 7.2. So, as covered in BlizzCon, they're going to be increasing the item level reward and difficulty of Heroic, Mythic, and Mythic Plus, so that they remain relevant with the item levels and player power that's in that patch. He also said, and announced today, that they're going to increase the gear reward from normal dungeons to 825, in addition to the traditional catch-up mechanics that they might add in a patch, like say with the Tanan catch-up. So what that means is, like his example, you're eye level 780, when you ding, you can actually just do a whole bunch of normal dungeons and some world quests, and it means the normal dungeons are actually relevant gameplay, and that will get you into Heroics. We don't know what item level Heroics will be in that patch though, so again, that just really remains to be seen. Next, we've got the topic of legendary items. So first of all, let's talk about their balance. He said that they're not really meant to be equal as far as power goes, and that they like the idea of people swapping them in and out based on their actual effect, because sometimes having utility there could be really useful. So really, your 2 legendary item limit, it's kind of like 2 things that you socket into your character. You could go for a little bit more damage, or you know that a fight could be really good for one of the utility effects, and he really does seem to like those utility effects, and that this swapping them in and out based on what's best for the situation is something that will happen as time goes by and people get more legendaries. He did say though that they want to tone down some of the more powerful ones and bring some of the weaker ones up though, and I guess it's just that some of their intended gameplay for the legendaries will be a little bit more prevalent once you actually have an option. Now, we also have legendary upgrades. They are going to allow you to upgrade your current legendary items when the item level ceiling increases with Nighthold's release. Right now, I believe 795 is like your eye level ceiling for the expansion. That'll be going up. I think it's to 920 or 925. That could change though. Their goal is that the old launch legendaries are still going to be useful, so by doing relevant content, you can upgrade them. Also, somebody did ask him whether they plan to increase the equipped limit for legendaries in 7.2. He said that that will not be happening in the current plan with patch 7.2, though they'll likely do it in the future, which I think for my reading either means like 7.2.5 or patch 7.3. And then next, let's just go through the miscellaneous kind of bucket. This is just a whole bunch of very interesting things, but didn't necessarily fit into the wider categories. First of all, the quick join toast. That like does a little beeping sound that people don't like. A hotfix has came that has stopped that noise, and that should be live as of the time you see this video. Next, we got the topic of hidden secrets. So he said they learned that the secret items are really cool. Kosumoth is their favorite overall. They think that the artifact appearances were a bit of a mixed bag. He said that in future they want to minimize frustration and make things feel a bit less like a Sombra ARG where you're using external tools and websites to work stuff out so that it just feels like it makes more sense in game. They don't want to overdo it, of course, but they do want to do more stuff like that in the future, and they have some quality of life improvements for the RNG stuff, like the Paladin's fishing. Basically, they want to add in a form of bad luck protection. Next, you've got the topic of Kirin daily quests. A bunch of people said, hey, these haven't happened since 7.1. Turns out they adjusted them to be less common, and the RNG is just that they haven't popped yet. Overall, their goal is to get about 2 of those every 3 weeks. They're meant to feel a bit more rare, a little bit more different, so their gameplay doesn't feel different when it happens just as often as anything else. We've also got the topic of auction house improvements. You know I really like gold making. As much as those videos always get a lot of hate, I still love gold making, so this is a pretty important topic to me. He said that we will see improvements, and it's more a question of when for AH improvements. They are dissatisfied with the base AH UI, and Ian actually recommended using Auctionator, and said that he kind of hates having to recommend an add-on because the core UI is so bad, but that's what he did recommend. The largest thing they would like to do, he said, is a different way of dealing with commodities. For an example, he said you should be able to list 200 and have somebody buy, say, 50, and have the remaining 150 stay there. I think a great example of things like this working well is the economy of EVE Online. Let's just say that I've got like 500,000 Tritanium ore in-game. What I can do is I can list that as a sell order with a price, and then if somebody wants to go there and buy 100,000, they can do that. My 400,000 are still sitting there, and overall that means that you're not posting individual stacks because you think, well, people only want to buy this item in the quantity of 50. No, if you have 5,000 ore, you can just put it all up there and people can just chip away from it, and then you'll just get all the money flowing into you. Another thing you can do in EVE, and I love this, is you can place a buy order. Now what's awesome about a buy order is basically you say, You put down a buy order of maybe 5,000 of an item, and people will then be able to browse through buy orders on the auction house, and that allows them to sell the item that they have immediately to that buy order. That's a cool little thing they could do with the AH, and hopefully that's something they look into a bit more. Next, failure rewards. I mentioned this in a video that was going over my kind of nitpicks and gripes with some of the Legion content. Basically, he said that the world quests are the baseline reward for, say, a world boss, so they're okay with a world boss not dropping anything interesting if you don't get a bit of gear because the world quest exists. He did say that they completely agree with bonus rolls. He said that they would like to give players an artifact power item as the consolation prize, but there are some tech issues as the bonus roll consolation reward system was designed to give a quantity of a currency and not an item, so it seems like there is some code in there that's not particularly extensible. And then finally, they do want to do an update to the Ghoul and Water Elemental models for the Death Knights and the Mages. That's pretty much it for this look through the Q&A. Overall, I think some very good stuff, lots of clarifications around upcoming content, and mainly I'm just very happy to see that there is some, there are some very literal, noticeable changes coming with the secondary stats. I do think that's a major problem in game that, just causes a whole bunch of social issues. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on that, check out the video from 2 days ago. That pretty much covers it all. But that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.